My name is Margaret. I am 52 years old. I live in a quiet town by the lake where the water reflects the sky, shifting with the seasons just as my life has changed over time. I have always been the kind of woman who believed in stability, in the comfort of a well-built home, in the strength of a family held together by love and effort. For years, I thought my life was secure, that I had built something lasting. But looking back now, I realize how fragile it all was, how easily everything I believed in could crumble. 10 years ago, I thought I had everything I needed. I was married to Nathan, a man I once trusted with my whole heart. Our love story was not grand or filled with passion like in the movies. It was simple, built on small moments, on the quiet certainty of a life shared. I met Nathan on a train, a chance encounter that led to a lifetime together. People always said a woman should be cautious with strangers, but something about him felt safe. He spoke with a steady voice, and there was warmth in his eyes, the kind that made me feel like I had known him forever. Nathan was never the kind of man to bring home flowers or whisper sweet words, but he showed his love in practical ways. He fixed things around the house before I even noticed they were broken. He made sure I had a coat when the weather turned cold. He called me from work just to remind me to bring an umbrella if the sky looked dark. For years, I thought that was enough. I thought love was in the details, in the quiet consistency of everyday life. We built a life together in this town, raising 2 sons, Ethan and Samuel. Our home was filled with warmth, with the sound of laughter, the smell of home-cooked meals, and the simple joys of a family growing together. I poured myself into making our house a home, tending the garden, planting flowers that thrived under my care. I watched our children grow, guiding them with love, while Nathan built his business, working long hours as a carpenter. For years, our life felt solid, like something that could never be shaken. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. Slowly, things between us began to shift. Nathan started coming home later, missing dinner, making excuses that never quite added up. I told myself it was stress, that work was taking its toll on him. I wanted to believe that everything was as it had always been. But deep down, a quiet unease had begun to settle in my heart. Then came the night when I could no longer pretend. Our granddaughter was supposed to visit, and Nathan had promised to be there. But as the evening stretched on, he never arrived. No call, no message, just absence. I sat by the window, staring at the dark road outside, feeling something inside me break. I didn't have the proof yet, but I knew. I knew in the way a woman always knows. That night was the beginning of the end. Life has a way of revealing the truth in whispers, creeping in like a shadow long before it fully takes form. I had spent years convincing myself that everything was fine, that the changes in Nathan were temporary, that the love we had built could withstand anything. But the truth does not wait for permission to be acknowledged. It forces itself upon you, shattering illusions with a quiet cruelty that leaves no room for denial. I was in town when I first heard it. I wasn't looking for answers, but they found me anyway, slipping through hushed voices, through pitying glances cast in my direction. A woman's voice, low but distinct, carried through the air. Poor Margaret. Everyone knows except her. The words froze me in place, a sudden weight pressing against my chest. My hands tightened around the basket I carried, my breath shallow, my world narrowing to the realization that I had been blind to something everyone else had already seen. I told myself I needed proof. My heart already knew, but my mind still fought against it, desperate for an explanation that would make everything feel less real. I drove to Nathan's workplace, my fingers gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But when I arrived, he wasn't there. The security guard's wife, a woman I barely knew, met my gaze with something that looked like sorrow. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. That evening, Nathan came home as if nothing had changed. I stood in the doorway, watching him, waiting. I didn't ask where he had been. I didn't need to. The silence between us was heavier than words. He didn't fight, didn't try to deny what I already knew. He simply packed his bags, each movement slow and deliberate, as if he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. There were no pleas for forgiveness, no apologies, no anger, only absence, already forming in the space he would leave behind. After he was gone, grief settled into my bones like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with silence so loud it swallowed me whole. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every sign I had ignored. Food lost its taste. My body grew weak, the weight slipping from me without effort. The house, once filled with life, became nothing more than a collection of walls holding memories I no longer wanted to face. Ethan and Samuel came often. They held my hands, sat with me in the quiet, offered words meant to heal. But nothing could fill the void left behind. Nathan had not just walked out of our home, he had walked out of years of trust, of stability, of the life we had built. And in his absence, all that remained was a silence that I could not escape. The days blended into each other, empty and silent. I had become a ghost in my own life, trapped in a cycle of sorrow that I did not know how to escape. I stopped answering calls, stopped stepping outside. I moved through my house as if it were a tomb, each room a reminder of what I had lost. I had convinced myself that isolation was the only way to survive, that if I stayed hidden away, the pain would eventually dull. But grief does not fade in silence. It festers. It was Deborah who refused to let me disappear. She showed up one morning, her voice cutting through the fog of my despair. I tried to resist, to tell her I wasn't ready, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. She told me there was something I needed to see. And so, for the first time in months, I left my house. We drove to a place I never would have gone on my own, a children's hospice center. The air inside was heavy with something indescribable, a mixture of sorrow and resilience. The children were small, their bodies frail, but their smiles were bright. The mothers sat beside them, their exhaustion evident, but their love unwavering. I had spent months drowning in my own pain, yet here were women who faced loss every day and still found the strength to keep going. Deborah's words echoed in my mind. These women don't have time to cry over the past. They fight every day. Something inside me shifted. My grief was real, my suffering valid, but I was not the only one carrying pain. I had a choice. I could keep fading away, or I could stand up and do something. I started volunteering at the hospice. At first, I simply sat with the children, reading stories, letting their laughter fill the hollow spaces inside me. Then, little by little, I became more involved. I helped organize events, raised money for their medical care, supported the families who had nowhere else to turn. The more I gave, the more I felt like I was coming back to life. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not out of habit, not to mask my sadness, but because something real had awakened inside me. I had found a purpose beyond my grief. I had begun to heal. And just as I started to believe I had moved on, Nathan returned. I had imagined this moment many times, rehearsed the words I would say if Nathan ever returned. I thought I would feel anger, satisfaction, or even triumph at seeing him brought low by the same cruelty he once inflicted on me. But when I opened the door and saw him standing there, all I felt was exhaustion. He looked older, the weight of years etched into his face. His shoulders sagged, his eyes hollow. Whatever life he had chosen after me had not been kind to him. He spoke with hesitation. A man stripped of pride, his new wife had deceived him, led him to believe he was raising his own child, only for the truth to unravel in the most humiliating way. He had lost everything, his home, his stability, his sense of self, and now he was here, standing on the threshold of the life he had walked away from. He asked if he could stay, just for a while, just until he figured things out. I should have said no. I owed him nothing. My sons certainly thought so. Ethan and Samuel were furious when they found out, their voices sharp with disbelief. They told me I had no obligation to a man who had left me in ruins. They reminded me of the nights I had cried, the silence he had left behind. But I wasn't searching for revenge. I wasn't even searching for closure. I only wanted peace. Nathan settled into the guest room, moving through the house like a ghost of the past. He tried to make himself useful, fixing loose cabinets, repairing broken furniture, mending things as if it would somehow erase what he had broken between us. I watched him from the window, unsure of what I felt. There was no relief in his suffering, no vindication in his downfall. He was just a man, lost and reaching for something that no longer belonged to him. Then came the night when everything changed again. A heavy thud echoed from the guest room. My heart clenched as I rushed toward the sound. Nathan lay collapsed on the floor, his body trembling with fever. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold. I froze. This was the moment I had never prepared for. Did I still owe him care? Could I stand by and watch him suffer? The question lingered, heavy and unanswerable, as I knelt beside the man who had once shattered my world. I called the doctor, not out of love, not out of obligation, but out of something simpler, duty. Watching Nathan struggle on the floor, weak and feverish, I knew I could not be the kind of person who turned away. His suffering was not my victory. His pain was not my justice. So I did what needed to be done. As he lay in bed, his body worn and fragile, he muttered words I had once longed to hear. Apologies, regrets, whispered between fevered breaths. But they no longer had weight. Words meant nothing now. They could not erase the nights I had spent alone, the years of doubt, the quiet undoing of the life we once shared. Days passed. Nathan slowly recovered, regaining strength, but nothing between us changed. He was here, but the past did not vanish with his illness. One morning I sat beside him, watching him in silence. For the first time since he returned, I spoke. I told him forgiveness was not something given freely. It was something that had to be earned. He did not argue. He did not plead. He simply nodded, and for once I believed he understood. He stayed, not as my husband, not as the man I had once loved, but as a presence in the background of my life. He fixed things around the house, tended to the garden, moved through the space like someone trying to repay a debt he could never fully settle. But I had changed. I was no longer the woman who begged for love, who waited for promises to be kept. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had built something beyond him. One evening, as the sun melted into the lake, I closed my eyes and let the past fade into the quiet ripples of the water. I asked myself one last question. Did I forgive him? Or did I simply let go? Margaret's story is one of betrayal, resilience, and ultimately self-liberation. In today's world, many people find themselves in similar situations, clinging to relationships that no longer serve them, struggling with the idea of forgiveness, and questioning whether moving on means letting go or holding on to past wounds. Her journey teaches us that healing is not about forgetting or excusing pain, but about reclaiming our power. One key lesson is that forgiveness is not an obligation. Many feel pressured to forgive those who have wronged them, but true forgiveness comes only when we are ready. It is a personal journey, not something to be forced. Another lesson is that self-worth is not defined by another person's actions. Margaret learned that she was whole even without Nathan, and we too must recognize our own strength beyond failed relationships. If you are struggling with betrayal, take time to rebuild yourself first. Set boundaries, focus on self-growth, and surround yourself with those who uplift you. And most importantly, remember that letting go does not mean weakness. It means choosing peace over pain. Your past does not define you, but how you move forward does. Your strength is your story. If this journey resonated with you, subscribe and be part of a community where wisdom, resilience, and new beginnings shine. Your next chapter starts now.